Okay, in this video, I'm going to answer a question I get sometimes. I get it about once or twice a year. How do you thin down a thick, small point? And I think it's an important question, although my channel is built around how I overcame the challenge of thinning, how I thin points, and it's mainly with indirect percussion. I mean, 90% of my videos are how to thin. But this is a very specific question that I get, and I think it's because new guys are making points mainly with pressure, right? And they're getting down to the final shape of the point, and it's too thick. And then when they try to thin it down, they break it, or it gets way too narrow. They end up with a drill or something like that, right? So I'm going to show you, mainly with pressure, how to thin a point as best I can when it gets small and difficult to handle. It rocks back and forth on the pad. There's various problems. You can get a dished out area in your pad that will cause it to snap in the middle when you put a lot of pressure to try to remove these thinning flakes. You'll get overshot flakes. If you try to also thin from the base by maybe taking one or two percussion flakes, it'll snap the whole thing in half, or it'll blow off the tip. All kinds of problems happen with the small points. With a larger biface, you also have these problems, but it's much easier to hold on to, much easier to use various methods like percussion, direct percussion, and with different materials, and still get good results, if you have a larger biface. With a small point, not only do you have to be careful about the tools that you're using, but you have to know your material well, or use good material in order to thin down something thick when it's small. Okay, so those are the particular issues with small points, and I think I'll get into maybe some other issues as I'm going along that I forgot to mention. Okay, so I'll be doing this with steel like my other videos, my other recent videos, although it's probably better to use copper or antler. And when I say better, I mean those tools, copper and antler, give you a much more refined result with a lot less practice. You can get nice flakes with steel, but in my view so far, my opinion so far, you need a lot more practice. And one of the things that I noticed with steel that helped me to improve some of these flakes is to use a softer mallet, like a plastic mallet, when I'm hitting this indirect percussion flaker. And I might even try to get some rubber that I can place over this to make it even softer as far as cushioning the blow. Because steel, because it is so hard, it'll smash into the stone, and unless you have a very good platform, it crushes a lot of your attempts. Okay, the steel will crush a lot of the edge and the platforms that you develop. But if you slow the impact down, or if you cushion the blow, it gives the stone a little bit more time to react. It gives the crack in the stone a little bit more time to expand, instead of trying to catch up to the steel impact, the impact of the steel. The impact of the steel is very abrupt, very harsh, and it doesn't give the stone a chance to fracture in a very smooth way, if you know what I mean. Okay. So I'm going to intentionally make this difficult for myself. I tried this yesterday and it was okay, but I'm going to refilm this today. I came up with a fairly good point, but I don't think it was thick enough to show the level of frustration that is experienced by some of you guys. I have a habit of making sure I'm thin enough before I get to the final stage. But in this video, I'm going to make it difficult on myself by not thinning at all until the very end, so I can show you guys, maybe some of you guys are saving your points that are really thick to come back to later, so you can thin them down once you get better at it. You know, I did that with some of my preforms, and it does help you, although I just usually start from scratch every time, and I'll just give the preforms to somebody else or do something else with them. You know, once in a while I'll use a preform as a tool of some sort. Sometimes I'll work with wood, like with arrow shafts in particular, use the preforms as little scrapers or shapers of the wood, things like that. But I don't normally do that kind of stuff. I've given away a lot of preforms in boxes of flakes that I've given away. I usually just start over from scratch. Okay. I'm going to reduce this somewhat with direct percussion, just because this stone is nice. It lends itself to being shaped easily with percussion. Now again, if you're using a nice quality stone, it helps a lot. And I think in a lot of my videos I've worked very difficult stones, so I'm not going to do that with this video. Difficult stone has issues of it by itself, and it's difficult to demonstrate a technique on a stone that's not cooperative, if you know what I mean. Now, if you're primarily using obsidian and you're ending up with thick points or very thick preforms, the issue is your technique, right? Because it's a very easy stone to flake. So what's wrong there is the technique that you're using is not working. It's not really the material or your tools. With obsidian, though, you are going to have a lot of issues with brittleness. If you hit the base, for instance, with obsidian, you can crack it very easily, especially with the brittle types. There is grades to obsidian, believe it or not. There's some very brittle types and some very strong types of obsidian. You can compare them to bottle glass. The best obsidian is about the same as bottle glass, and it goes downhill from there. Okay, I did have some obsidian. I have tried some that felt better than bottle glass, but it's rare. You know, it seemed to flake a lot better, and it was less prone to snapping in the middle. It was better to work, I felt, than bottle glass, but it's very rare, like I said. Anyway, I'll be working this mainly with pressure. I think I've done enough videos with indirect percussion, because that's primarily how I overcome the challenge of thinning something down, is with indirect percussion. So I don't need to go over that. I'm going to go and do this mainly with percussion and pressure. This is good quality heat treat. It's a chert. You can work it raw, but it becomes extremely easy to work after heat treating. Although sometimes you do get problem areas after heating. Like, see that those little areas get very very dicey. I mean, they exist in the raw stone also, but they get more unstable with heat. These little internal cracks. I don't know what you call those. I think you get what I mean. Not all stone is consistent. Okay. So I've got a pressure flaker that I've been using lately, but I modified it to do some notching, so it looks kind of flat or chisel shaped. So it's not ideal, you know. I'd normally just have a regular nail with a rounded tip, but I don't have one available. Let's see. Yeah, I'm missing a flaker. Anyway, I'm just going to use this. I made a bunch of them and then I lost a few. I made a bunch of notching flakers. This is the one I've been using here, the one in the middle, for notching. And the other ones are just standbys. And when I need to, I can file these down to the shape. This shape here is just the shape that I get after flattening a nail, tip of a nail. You know, you hammer it down and you just get this shape here. And then when I was driving it into the wood, you know, because I drilled a hole first, slightly smaller than the nail itself, I hammer it in and I get that little flat tip there. Anyway, that's why that looks like that. Okay. But I had a pressure flaker with this, just a rounded tip. You know, you grind it round. But I don't know where it is. The one in here is slightly less diameter, so I need to make another one. Okay. Anyway, we're going to continue with this one, even though it's not ideal. And as I was doing it yesterday, I noticed I was not able to capture a lot of my pressure flaking because I would be in front of the camera like this doing pressure. But I'm going to try to change the angle, which means that I don't normally nap at this angle like this. I normally am up higher, but I won't be able to do that because you won't be able to see. And the main thing about using heavy pressure, which is what I'm going to do, is you have to have a good seat for your tool. Now I can talk about platforms, but it gets a little distracting. Just make sure you can seat your tool on the edge or on the surface. Okay, it's got to have a good seat in order to handle the pressure. So I'll make a pass around the whole thing. Now, see that? I thought I would have a lot more. Let's see. I thought I would have a lot better platform than I did. That snapped off a little bit too easily. So you have to watch for that. Put it up high enough on the surface here so you can generate a lot of force without accidentally snapping off a flake too soon. Now, steel is more slippery than copper, so that's something else to think about. And slipping helps. No, it doesn't help to remove flakes. It hinders your flake removal, the slipping. But slipping can also occur with natural material like bone. And abrading the edge does help present a better surface for your tool. But I tend to not abrade too much because then sometimes it's just too strong and I can't develop a good amount of pressure, or the amount of pressure that I need to remove the flake I want. If it's too ground down and too strong of a platform or an edge. Now most guys can get flakes like this in the beginning. If you can't, you've got to do a lot more practicing. I really can't stress it enough. Flaking is just a matter of practice for the most part. When you get into strategies, you've got to get your system down for placing your flaker on the surface somewhere and actually be able to consistently take flakes off before you can start thinking about taking certain types of flakes. And these long, narrow flakes require a little bit of finesse, and what that means is you have to be conscious of keeping the tool in contact with the platform throughout the removal of the flake. You've got to kind of, in your mind, think about slowing down the process just slightly. Without easing up on the pressure, you've got to slow it down a little bit. If you're just really in a hurry and snapping off flakes, that's the opposite of what you want to be doing with thinning. Thinning requires a mental attitude of going a little bit slower, but generating more power than you're normally used to. They do go well hand in hand, you know what I'm saying? It is easier to generate a lot of force if you take your time and go slower, but that's what you're going to have to be doing. So I'm just basically making it convex, also getting the feel for the stone, make sure I'm understanding what's going on so I can get consistent flakes. Because when I'm getting to the end of this process, I don't want to have to be guessing as to whether my flakes are going to be working or not. They've got to work toward the end. You've got to have consistency when you want to thin down your thick point. There can't be any mystery in what's going to happen when you press off a flake. I mean, there's always going to be some amount of mystery because knapping is a game of dice. In general, it's risky, but you've got to understand that if you don't have consistency that's manageable, or that allows you to have a manageable time of it, you're not going to get very far when you get to the final stages. You're just going to end up with a very fat point. So I guess that's the key, you know, just get into the zone and become very aware of each flake and your capabilities, and make sure you're consistent and you know what's going to happen, and you'll be better off. And make sure you don't have a lot of defects, because damage control when it's very thick is not an easy thing to manage, because what you're trying to do primarily is send flakes across, you know, and the rule is get it past halfway in order to thin down the point. Like most of these flakes are not going halfway, so I'm intentionally making this into a thick preform so I can show you what I do. Now, I might take a few percussion flakes just to get rid of some of these problem areas. But I have to fight the urge to do that, because I'll end up thinning it down too much for the video. This video, I'm supposed to be intentionally making it very, very thick. The thicker I can end up with, the better, so that I can show you what I do. Now I might have addressed this before, I just can't remember. So bear with me if I've already done this before. I am going to get into some other types of videos. I've been wanting to do videos on advanced techniques, but as I'm progressing with my napping, it seems like everything is just still a mastery of the fundamentals. There really isn't all that many advanced techniques. And you can get good at parallel oblique flaking, right? You can make nice flake patterns across the whole point. I suppose that's an advanced technique, but what you're doing is just basically fundamentals, a very consistent application of fundamentals for every flake, and making sure you're not random. Because a consistent parallel oblique flake pattern is the opposite of random. Random, you would just attack the worst areas first, but in one of these pattern flaking techniques, well, not in one, but each one that I've seen, you have to have a very consistent preform so that each flake has a good chance of doing what you want. You're not going to be wanting to do damage control. And what I mean by damage control is you're not going to be trying to eliminate defects at the same time that you're trying to do a nice flake pattern. Now, why would they do nice flake patterns? Was that done on purpose, or was it just a consequence of practice? You know, after doing a whole bunch of points, they just come out that way because that's your natural progression of your skill? Or what was it meant for? Does it strengthen the blade or anything like that? Does it make it stronger to have nice flake scars? The answer to that last one is no, it doesn't really make it stronger, although you will need a consistent and smooth preform to begin with, right? To get that nice pattern. So I guess it is stronger in that respect. But I think the reason why it was done is just for expediency. After you get really good, you just go down, you know what's going to happen with each flake. You just do a pass, turn it over, do another pass, and then just keep doing passes around it, and you know what these flakes are going to be doing. So you don't need to do a random type of technique. You start out being very consistent because you know that your skill is to that level where you can just take a flake wherever you want, or make it go where you want with each attempt. Within reason, because of course flintknapping is risky. And the real artifacts do have defects in the napping. You do see unintentional overshots and stuff like that. And I say unintentional because I think overshots are mainly mistakes, but there are times, and there's a big discussion on this, there are times where overshots are I don't know, advantageous, but they are done with the result in mind. I think sometimes they are taken advantage of. If you do a flake all the way across and the other side looks pretty crappy, and you do an intentional flake all the way across, it will remove that bad spot on the other side. But you end up with a an edge that is rounded and very difficult to knap. So you'll usually have to zigzag that edge before you can continue. You know, if you wrap it with an overshot, you're going to have a rounded edge. Okay. Anyway, I'll get into discussions of that sort of thing later. And with steel, you do need to abrade a little bit more than normal. Just because, well, two reasons. One, it slips less because you've got more of an abrasion on there, but also because that steel is going to crush anything delicate. Now, hopefully you can see how far up on the edge I'm going and where I'm placing. I just place on the strongest spot that I think will work. I'm not going all the way across yet. Well, I probably should try here. With some more inward pressure, I can make these flakes a little bit longer. And what I do is, instead of snapping downward mainly, I push inward, and I'm also following the flake. Instead of just pushing downward, mostly downward, and not even worrying about the flake or how I'm following it. A longer flake requires you to follow it. It's a feeling of following the flake and following through with your pressure. You want to keep your tool in contact with the platform as long as possible. That's one of the rules in flint knapping, keeping your tool in contact with the platform in a consistent way so it's not bouncing or chattering, and then a long enough period of time to remove the flake. Especially long ones, you want to have a long amount of contact, a long period of time. But the times are very short. All these amounts of time are fractions of a second, but if you can delay it a little, it makes a big difference in how far the flake travels. So when I say keep it in contact with the flake, with the platform for a long time, it's relative, because it's all within fractions of a second. So you're not really talking about long periods of time, but you will get into knowing, or you'll get the feel for knowing those little subtle differences in the period of time that you're in contact with the platform. For a while, for a long time with my knapping, I was having trouble generating a lot of pressure. But I think I've recovered from that. My joints are doing a lot better now. I'm not eating all that junk food. And concentrating more on strengthening my forearms and stuff. I'll do exercises now and then. So keep that in mind. Some of you guys have told me that you're not doing pressure anymore, and you've switched over mainly to indirect percussion just because of that issue of not having the strength anymore. So yeah, continue with the indirect percussion for sure. This is just for you guys that do mainly pressure work and are asking me how to thin down a thick preform. Okay. Now, if you're working with tough stone, I think I've said this already. If you're working with really tough stone, you're not going to be able to thin unless you've got really, really superhuman strength, right? There's a reason why guys that work tough stone have really thick points at the end, because it's very difficult to work tough stone. Now, this is not tough stone. This is really good stone. So the techniques I'm using on this may not work with the stone that you've got. Okay. Okay, we'll pause it here and continue on the next video.